Hi, so my name's Ashley. I'm the Assistant Director for the Center for Civic Justice at Stony Brook. And our project, one of our students, Annie, worked on it with me, but she's taking a final and graduating. So she was unavailable to be here today. But our project is institutionalized voter registration at new student orientation. And so we currently do that, but the reason we chose to do it for our project was because we've sort of shifted from a multiple orientation sessions over the summer to a 1 week welcome week model, in which we have a much more limited time space to register students at orientation. And so we're sort of like workshopping that and figuring out how we can create it to be a resource so that other campuses, if they've either never done it before at orientation or are transitioning to a similar tighter timeline, hopefully this can be helpful. So this is, I cut it in half because it was too long for a PowerPoint presentation, but this is the draft resource that I have in the Google Drive that basically breaks it down into the 5 sections. The final resource, the goal is to use the same template, but each page to be for each section and sort of create a checklist for people to be able to use of all of the steps that we go through. And I'm sure in that phase, I will think of extra things that go in between subsets of steps that are important to know. So for this presentation, I'm basically going to go through each of the 5 sections and give a little bit more detail of what we do here so that you can maneuver it to fit for your campus or your organization. So for us, the first thing is buy-in from the college or university. So our biggest partner is our new student programs, which is essentially our orientation department. And so that goes from all the way into, we have been meeting since March to schedule orientation for August. And so making sure that you're including yourself in those conversations. I currently am sitting on the required programs committee because our university has designated voter registration as one of the required programs for students. They don't have to register, but they have to attend a voter registration session, so they're informed on how to register to vote. And so that's the first step, obviously, is getting your college or university to sit down with you and say, yes, we can give you time during our orientation to register students. Some of the other important partners that we collaborate with is admissions. That helps us keep track of what that's going to look like, how many students are coming in, how many are new students, how many are international students, how many are first year students who are probably not registered versus transfer students who maybe are registered but would just need to update their voter registration information. So we keep constant communication with them over the summer so that we know what we're planning for come August. And then another important partner for us is campus residences. So since our orientation happens the week before classes start, if we're having any student workers or student helpers help us out during that process, a lot of the times it requires them to move onto campus earlier. And so that is definitely a conversation there for us. They ask us in June what students we're going to have coming back to help during orientation. Such as something to keep in mind that if you're going to have student workers that don't live locally to help you out during a time that's prior to when the academic year starts, you want to make sure that there's space for them to come onto campus if they can help. Yeah, and like I said, I participate in the planning committee, and then I'm the point person for voter registration. So as we're building the schedule for the entire welcome week, I can make sure that they're giving us enough time for our voter registration sessions. So planning and preparation is broken down into 2 because this is obviously a lot. So for us, it's making sure we're coordinating with our local board of elections. They've been really great since we have been doing this for the past few years in giving us as many voter registration forms as we need. But logistics for the actual day of is mainly what we're planning over the summer. And again, that is all fluctuates based on how many students we're going to have. So right now we have 3,400 first year students and then about 1,200 transfer students. And we have 2 days to register everybody. So what that looks like for us is determining sort of what the rooms are going to look like, which is a little bit tricky. So for us, they give us 3 lecture halls on campus in which we're able to break down 250 students per room, which is 750 students per session. And so they're giving us essentially 4 slots so that we can register all of the first year students on one day. And then the following day, they're giving us those same 3 rooms, but 2 slots, since we'll have less students to register. And so that's something they start asking pretty early. So if you're trying to think of how many students you're going to have, how many you're going to have to register, thinking about what building spaces on campus would accommodate that, what rooms make sense for a lot of students to be able to sit, have table space. We use sort of like the science lecture halls at our campus because they have just the most seats and everyone has a desk space. So it's easier for students to come in, fill out a voter registration form, and then like have us check it, as opposed to just like a giant space where there's not that much table space. And then the next part for us is student and staffing requirements. So like I said, for us, we have about 250 students in each room. And the best way for us to do that is to have 3 or 4 trained students in there to be walking around and helping people fill out voter registration forms, and like answering any questions. And I can go into more detail about that as we move on. I know we're tight on time. Yeah, so then the rest of it is really day of logistics. So for us, we have a presentation. I know we were like in conversations, me and Maddie, about like maybe being able to like pre-populate a form, and that way students would only have to come to the session to sign it. We're running into some setbacks with that. So for right now, I'm just going to talk about our traditional setup of how we do it. So our presentation during orientation is essentially screenshots of all of the sections on a voter registration form. And during that presentation, we walk students through, okay, this is the next section, this is how you would fill it out. And so we have one student that's at the front of the room giving that presentation and walking students through. And then, like I said, the 2 or 3 other students who are walking around answering specific questions, helping people fill out things. It's important that we have Spanish forms. We have forms for New York State. We also have generic voter registration forms for students who might be in other states. And that's sort of the setup on the day of. And like I said, then implementation. So this is what the students would be responsible for. One student who's leading the presentation, the other students who are double checking forms, and then a staff member who would be me, who's walking around the different rooms and just making sure that there's no other questions. So something that we do at Stony Brook also, which can be its own presentation on its own, is our international student voting. And so that we have a whole international student voting webpage here. And so we do still give a presentation during orientation to our international students. It's just a little more tailored to walking them through the resources that are available to them on our website rather than showing them how to register to vote. But at the end of the day, after their 30-minute time block takes place where they fill out the form, they then basically form lines and come to the front of the room, and all of our students will double check their forms to make sure there's no like glaring errors before they take them. Something that's really big for us, and I'm sure at a lot of other campuses, is that the addresses can sometimes be complicated with where these students are registered to vote. So that's something that, we go over and make sure that, there's no errors. We also collect everyone's Stony Brook University ID number and phone number on a sticky note right at the top of the voter registration form. We double check every single address to make sure that they are all registered correctly. And if there's an error, then we can just reach back out to them and let them know like that they need to come and fix something, or they forgot. Hopefully the checking day of catches things like they signed the form and their birthday's there and the date's correct and things like that. And then lastly, is just follow up. Like I said, we verify all of our student addresses so that we make sure that everyone's registering to vote correctly, making sure they're all filled out correctly, following up with necessary students. And then we also keep a spreadsheet. As we're doing that, we'll spot check the forms, enter all the registered voters into a spreadsheet for on campus and off campus so that we can send important information by pulling everyone's email and sending them information like as election day is coming up. If they're registered to vote on campus, or if they're registered to vote off campus, we'll give them a resource of how to find their polling location. And for us, on campus is easy because if they're registered here, they vote on campus. So we are able to tailor emails and information specifically by keeping track of which students are registering on or off campus. Yeah, I know it was a lot of information, but yeah, that is basically the end of it. Obviously, we coordinate with our local board of elections because they don't want 4,000 forms all at once. So we will sort of do a chunk and then drop them off and work our way through that process. And then we collect any forms that don't need to go to the local board of elections and we mail those out. And then, like I said, we email registered students a lot of important information by keeping track of that information when we're logging all of the forms. And that is all I have. If other people have questions, I don't know how much time there's left for questions, but I'm happy to answer any.
We have 2.5 minutes for questions.
Okay.
Looks like Josh Young said, what if students want to vote from their home address? So I guess like the non-campus address.
Yeah, so when we're registering to people and walking them through the form, basically we'll say, you know, if you're registering to vote at your home address, you can go ahead and fill that out. The only time that we, you know, ask them to leave it blank and check with us that they're writing it correctly is if they're registering to vote on campus, because their dorm building number has to be written in a certain way. If not, they'll say their address is incorrect. So we still keep that information. We just keep track of who's on campus versus who's off campus. So you don't want to be sending people info that they can come vote on election day at our student activity center if this isn't their polling location. Any other questions? Okay, well, if there is none, then that is everything. Like I said, I plan to make like the first resource into multiple pages with this information in more detail, so that people can go back to it and refer to it and make sure they're not missing any important steps. I'm sure, like I said, there's one or two things that are just so common nature at this point that I probably forgot to write down, but would be important. So I'd be happy to like sit down and go through that or meet with anybody if they're like struggling at any one of these steps and want to talk through like how they might be able to do it at their university. But this is what has been working for us. And so highly recommend trying to get it in at orientation. It's one of our most successful ways to reach as many students as we can before like it is then hard to engage them outside of required programming, unfortunately. So yeah, so thank you.